Lydia is just so cute, I heard a voice say clearly as the door opened. The name Lydia, coming from Quinn's mouth, made me freeze in my tracks. I wondered who it could be, but hearing that name confirmed my suspicion. The woman speaking was my sister, Karen. Quinn kept calling Lydia's name over and over, almost like he was in a trance. I was shaking but quickly snapped out of it. I realized I had to capture this moment on video, so I grabbed my smartphone and recorded the scene. After that, I quietly slipped away. A little while later, the two of them came out of the bedroom. When they saw me, their faces turned pale. I calmly said, "That's right. I sent the video of you two to Anders. We need to talk about what to do next, the four of us." At my words, Lydia's face went even paler. She stammered, "What? What do you mean?" I replied, "Just what it sounds like. I have the video as proof. What have you done?" As I held up my smartphone, my sister panicked and then lunged at me. "My name is Hannah, a 40-year-old housewife. I have twin boys who are in the 6th grade of elementary school. Twins seem to run in our family because I am also a twin. I have a twin sister named Karen. Being identical twins, we never really felt like sisters. Instead, we were more like rivals. Even if we weren't twins, I think it would have been the same. I grew up constantly being compared to Karen. Over time, I developed a strong complex about her, and she, in turn, became obsessed with outshining me. Karen was always the cute and charming one. People naturally gravitated towards her because she was outgoing and friendly. On the other hand, I was shy and reserved. Because I was a bit of an introvert, most people didn't notice me as much. Whenever we met new people, all the attention went to Karen. Despite our rivalry, I adored Karen deeply. Her ever-smiling face and popularity were something I admired. But it seems Karen didn't feel the same way about me. When we were in elementary school, we used to play together a lot, but I always ended up with the roles nobody wanted. For example, during a game of tag, if nobody wanted to be it, I was always the one forced into that role. Even when our friends suggested we decide by rock, paper, scissors, Karen would pressure me by saying, "Hannah, you do it, right?" Not wanting to upset Karen or be left out, I felt like I had no choice but to agree. Karen's manipulative behavior didn't stop at playtime. When we were in 6th grade, we were deciding roles for a school play. We were going to perform Snow White, and since I wasn't much of an actress, I hoped to be the narrator. However, I caught a cold and had to miss school on the day the roles were assigned. Karen said she'd tell the teacher that I wanted to be the narrator, so I trusted her and felt relieved. But when I returned to school after recovering, I was shocked to find out that I had been cast as the lead role. "Why am I the lead?" I asked a friend in disbelief. My friend replied, "Karen said you wanted to be the lead." I was stunned. "I never said that," I protested. But it was too late. The roles had already been decided. Apparently, as we were entering puberty, no one wanted the potentially embarrassing lead role of Snow White. So, the quiet girl who was absent, was chosen. Even the teacher found it odd that I, usually so reserved, had expressed a desire to take the lead role. "Did Hannah really say that?" the teacher had asked Karen. Karen responded, "Yes, she really wants to, but she's too shy to volunteer. Please let this be an opportunity for Hannah to shine." Karen made it seem like she was doing me a favor, but in reality, she had manipulated the situation. I cried, insisting that I couldn't do it and didn't want to. However, everyone else's roles had already been assigned. Chastised by teachers and parents alike, I somehow managed to pull through. Surprisingly, the play was a huge success. Teachers, parents, and friends all praised me for my performance. But amidst all the praise, Karen looked displeased. She said, "Anyone could have done that. Getting all that praise for such a little thing is just silly." From that moment on, she began to openly resent me. That was the first time I truly felt Lydia's dislike. After that, she stopped inviting me to play. At first, it was painful, but once I realized I was no longer being forced into unpleasant roles, I made other friends and started enjoying myself. By the time we reached middle school, many people didn't even know that Karen and I were twins. We had become so distant that we hardly spoke at school, and we didn't even look alike anymore. We requested not to be in the same class, and I was finally able to enjoy my own life. But then one day, as I was studying for high school entrance exams, Lydia walked up to me while I was studying and asked, "Have you decided which high school you're applying to?" "Yeah," I replied. "I'm thinking of going for a high school." A high school was the newest and closest school to our house, and it was known for being very competitive. I had been working hard for 3 years because I really wanted to get into that school. But when Karen heard my choice, she laughed like it was a joke. "A high school? You've got to be kidding, right? Why don't you just go to be high school with me? You wouldn't even need to study much for that." Karen had always managed to get her way with me, but this time, I didn't want her deciding my future. For the first time, I stood up to her. "I've decided to go to a high school," I said firmly. "You don't know if it's impossible for me. If you don't want to study, that's fine, but don't get in my way." I turned back to my textbook, trying to focus, but Karen was angry. "What did you just say to your older sister?" she snapped. She grabbed my textbook and threw it on the floor. "What are you doing?" I shouted. "Even if you study, it's a waste of time. You're destined to be my slave and go to be high school with me," she said. That day, we ended up in a physical fight. Our parents came running when they heard the noise and pulled us apart. By then, my textbook was torn to pieces, but more than that, my heart was shattered. Hearing Karen's true feelings about me, seeing me as nothing more than a convenient target, was a painful awakening. But I didn't give up on studying. Fortunately, my parents contacted the school, and I got a new textbook. With their support, Karen stopped interfering with my studies, and I was able to focus and eventually got into my chosen school. As she had planned, Karen barely studied for the exams and ended up going to be high school. So, we went to different high schools, pursued our education at different universities, and eventually started our careers. As an adult, I began living on my own, and that's when I met a man named Johan. We were hired at the same time and felt a connection because we were from the same area. When he asked me out, I felt like I was dreaming. "I actually like you, Hannah," he said. "I'd be happy if you'd go out with me." Hearing those words made me incredibly happy. I had feelings for Johan too, but I had never had the courage to admit them openly. I wasn't as pretty as Karen, and I had almost no experience with love during my school days, so I could hardly believe he felt the same way about me. "I'd be happy to," I replied. Being in a relationship for the first time made me feel overjoyed. I did my best to make Johan happy, cooking meals and preparing lunch boxes for him. Johan started visiting my apartment more often, and soon we were almost living together. "Hannah, I'll cook dinner tonight," he would say. It wasn't just me doing things for him. Johan was also very cooperative with household chores. Doing chores together was fun, and I began to think we could make a great married couple. 3 years into our relationship, we decided to get married. I was overjoyed and very happy about it, but there was one thing that worried me. "You're a twin, right? I'd like to meet your sister," Johan brought up one day. During the 3 years we were dating, I had told him that I had a twin sister, but I had never introduced him to Karen. I hadn't even told her about having a boyfriend. Since that big fight in middle school, there had been a deep rift between us. "Yeah, that's right," I replied. But if we were getting married, it was inevitable that Karen and Johan would meet. The thought of how Karen might scorn us made me anxious, but I knew I had to introduce them at some point. When I finally called Karen after a long time, she seemed surprised by my news and raised her voice. What? Married? Since when? I had told our parents, but it seemed Karen hadn't heard about it yet. She sounded like this was completely new to her. Yeah, and I want to introduce you to the man I'm going to marry. I'm busy, you know. Well, if you insist, I guess I could meet him, Karen replied, as condescending as ever. So I asked her to make some time for us. Karen hadn't changed since we were kids, and I figured I had to be the adult and humble myself. Johann suggested we all have a meal together with our parents, so we arranged to meet at a restaurant on Karen's day off. But even when the time came, Karen didn't show up. Karen's late. I thought she said she'd be on time. I muttered. Sorry, Johann. Don't worry about it, he said kindly. She'll show up eventually. Let's just wait a bit longer. Both my parents and I felt bad for keeping Johann waiting. Finally, 15 minutes past the scheduled time, Karen showed up in a flashy dress. Sorry, did you wait? She said casually. We did. What's with the outfit? I asked, trying to keep my frustration in check. Well, it's kind of like a meet and greet, right? I thought I should dress up, she said with a smirk. I couldn't help but be exasperated, and it wasn't just me. Our parents gave a resigned smile as well. If she knew it was a meet and greet, why couldn't she have been on time? I really wished she hadn't been late, especially without even sending a message. It seemed so immature for an adult to be late just because she wanted to get dressed up. But, wanting to keep the peace, I swallowed my words. We introduced Karen to Johann. Wow, Hannah, you've snagged a good-looking one. Working at the same place means he must be earning well, Karen said, making several rude comments to Johann the first time they met. She started grilling him with questions. What do you do in your free time with Hannah? No. What did you do before you started dating Hannah? It felt like she was interrogating him as if they were on a speed dating session. Despite our parents' attempts to stop her, Karen kept going. It's fine, she said. I just want to know what kind of man Hannah's husband will be. Johann, being the gracious person he is, said, don't worry about it, and entertained Karen throughout the meal. By the end, I was completely exhausted and sighed deeply. But it didn't end there. On our way home, Johann said, Karen's quite the character, huh? She's so different from you. I always say you two are the least alike twins ever. I forced a smile and nodded, but then Johann added, maybe you should take a leaf out of Karen's book. She's always smiling, good at conversation, and cute. If I'd met her first. I was shocked. I had told him how uncomfortable Karen made me feel, so hearing him say this was deeply hurtful. Why don't you marry Karen then? I snapped back. She even said you were handsome. Johann quickly apologized, saying, sorry. It was just a joke. I'm glad I met you, Hannah, and I don't have any special feelings for Karen. Then you shouldn't say things that praise Karen and put me down, I replied. It was just a joke, Johann repeated, but I was still upset. Even though I was shocked, I wasn't going to call off our engagement over something like this. I just hoped he understood my feelings. Right after that, he said, but Karen is a nice girl. It's not good to be jealous of your sister. Let's all get along as a family. We're adults now. Things are different than they were. I had my reservations, but I knew our parents wanted Karen and me to get along. Still, I wanted Johann to be on my side. Why was he trying to bring Karen and me closer? But since we wouldn't be interacting with her much anyway, arguing seemed too troublesome, so I just nodded along to Johann's words. A few days later, I got a message from Karen that chilled me to the bone. Isn't Johann too good for you? Should I take him off your hands? She wrote. I was stunned and immediately replied, what are you talking about? Karen called me right away and said, just what I said. It's unbelievable that someone as dull as you will get married before me. She laughed and continued, He's high-earning and well-educated. Why not hand him over to me? We're twins. We've always shared everything. Don't say stupid things. I yelled back at Karen. I couldn't stand the idea of Johan being treated like an object, nor the notion that we had always shared everything. That was ridiculous. I had always just been someone for Karen to dump the things she didn't want on. That night, I told Johan about the message and warned him to be careful around Karen, but he seemed to take it lightly. He laughed and said, "It's nice to be liked that much. Don't worry, Karen's not serious." "It's not funny," I insisted. "You don't know what Karen might do." "Do you doubt my feelings?" Johan asked, looking a bit hurt. "It's okay because I said it's okay." Despite him being such a wonderful person, I felt like Johan had changed after meeting Karen. He seemed to agree with everything when it came to her, just because she was my sister. Other than that, he was the same wonderful partner as always, but I was dissatisfied with how he changed whenever Karen was involved. "Don't worry so much," Johan said again. And he was right. If he didn't sway, there was nothing Karen could do. Feeling unsettled by her words was proof that I hadn't fully trusted Johan. So, I decided to trust him and ignore Karen's messages. Even afterward, Karen sent me spiteful messages, but I never replied. Fortunately, she didn't interfere with us, and I prayed we could all become a happy family, even if we didn't see each other often. Years went by, and after I turned 35, my parents told me that Karen had gotten married. By then, I had blocked her and wasn't in contact with her, although we occasionally saw each other at our parents' home. Whenever we met, Karen would insult me for being nearly 35 and still unmarried. She had become resentful toward me, and it seemed she was avoiding me as well. I thought Karen, being so picky, wouldn't marry, but I was genuinely glad for her when I heard she had found someone. I realized how terrible I had been when I married Johan before her. Moreover, through my parents, Karen apologized to me after that, and we started communicating again. Indeed, things were beginning to change between us. Karen had changed, becoming much calmer than before. It was as if she had returned to the Lydia I once loved. I never thought the day would come when Karen and I could laugh together again, so I was very happy. Karen even introduced me to her husband. He was about 5 years our senior, named Anders, and he seemed to care deeply for Karen, which reassured me. Now that we were both married, Lydia and I became closer, and our parents were overjoyed to see us getting along. I wanted to make up for all the time we had spent apart. Then, a few years later, something unexpected happened. One day, I became ill at work and had to leave early. I wanted to inform Johan, but he was out on business, so I left a message with a colleague and went straight home. As soon as I entered the house, I immediately sensed that something was off. It felt like there was someone inside, even though the house was supposed to be empty. Could it be a burglar? That thought flashed through my mind as I quietly entered, listening closely. I could hear noises and voices coming from the bedroom. As I stood silently in front of the door, I recognized Johan's voice coming from inside, but I couldn't bring myself to speak up. The nature of his voice drained the blood from my face. It was unmistakably the sound of an intimate moment, and the creaking of the bed confirmed my worst fears. I didn't need to see inside to know what was happening, and my hands began to tremble. However, if Johan was cheating, I had to catch him in the act. With that thought, I carefully opened the door, my smartphone in hand, ready to record. What I saw inside the bedroom was even more shocking. "Lydia is really cute, isn't she?" Johan's voice became clearer as the door opened. Hearing him say her name, I froze. Now that he mentioned it, the female's voice was indeed Karen's. Johan kept foolishly repeating Karen's name. Trembling, I recorded the scene and quietly left. I sat in the dining area, in shock, for a while. I was supposed to be home early because I felt unwell, but the shock of what I had just witnessed made me forget about my illness entirely. Staring blankly at my phone, I just waited for this nightmare to end. Then, a few minutes later, the bedroom door opened. "I'll head back to work now, so lock up," said a voice. "Okay. It'd be nice if we could live together soon," another replied. Hearing this, I hurriedly stood up. Johan and Karen noticed the noise and saw me standing in the hallway. "Hannah, why are you here?" Johan exclaimed, turning pale. "Why? This is my house, right? But why is Karen here? Aren't you both supposed to be at work?" I asked. Karen looked away for a moment, but then smirked defiantly. "Why do you think? You wanted it from my own mouth, didn't you, Hannah?" Johan tried to stop her, but Karen wouldn't be silenced. "I've always hated how you look down on me. Happiness and Johan don't suit you. I'll take everything." With that, Karen declared her intentions. I just smiled at her words. "Is that so? Then I'll give you Johan, Karen. But don't think you can take my happiness." Karen seemed annoyed by my retort, glaring at me. To that, I continued, addressing her directly. "Yeah, I sent the video to Anders. Let's discuss this as a group of four sometime soon." Karen's face turned pale instantly. "What do you mean?" "Just what I said. If you want Johan, Anders should know about this, shouldn't he?" "What have you done?" Karen lunged at me, but Johan tried to stop her. "Karen, calm down." "How can I calm down?" she screamed. Just then, the smartphone inside Karen's bag rang. At that sound, Karen froze in place. "Looks like Anders is calling, isn't he?" I said. Pale-faced, Karen hesitantly looked at her bag, but there was no sign of her answering the call. In the silent room, only the sound of the phone echoed. After a while, it stopped ringing, and then my phone rang. "See, since Karen didn't answer, now he's calling me," I said, turning to Johan. "Hannah, I'm truly sorry. Please forgive Karen. Can you somehow cover for her with Anders? If not, Karen will lose everything." Johan started pleading, as if to protect Karen. Karen, standing next to him, began to sob bitterly, as if she were the tragic heroine in all this. What Johan said made sense, actually. Anders was not only Karen's husband, but also the president of the company where she worked. If Anders learned about Karen's infidelity, divorce talks might start, and she might not be able to continue working at his company, especially considering that this happened during work hours. But there was no room for sympathy. She did this knowing full well she could lose everything. "I can't possibly cover for her," I said firmly. "That's too harsh." Johan tried to defend Karen as usual. His words infuriated me, and I glared at him. "You're worried that Karen is the only one who's going to lose her family and job? That's a huge mistake," I shouted. Johan flinched at my outburst and started sweating profusely, as if he suddenly came to his senses. He must have finally understood the meaning of my words. "Just so you know, I've also sent the video to the company's main email address, including your department and name," I added. "What have you done?" Johan gasped. By then, Anders's call had ended. Johan and Karen stood frozen with a look of despair on their faces. After kicking them out of the house, I called Anders. "Sorry to disturb you at work," I said. "It's about the video, right?" he replied. "Yes, it involves Johan, doesn't it?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Yes," I replied to Anders's gentle voice. "I'm sorry for asking this of you," he said. Anders had actually consulted me because he felt something was off with Karen. It might have been plausible for the old Karen, but the current Karen truly loved Anders, and I didn't think she would cheat. I had conveyed as much to Anders, but just in case, he had asked me to gather evidence if Karen did something questionable. That's why I think I was able to film calmly. Please don't apologize. I'm glad I could capture evidence of Quim's infidelity. If you hadn't asked me, I probably wouldn't have thought to do so calmly, I told Anders. It would be a lie to say I wasn't shocked. Discovering an affair is shocking enough, let alone with one's own sister. I had every right to be angry. My sons will be home soon, so let's talk another time, I told Anders and hung up. Tears flowed endlessly, but for my sons and for my own future, I knew I had to be strong. That day, I went about my usual routines, and when the kids had settled down for the night, Johan came home. "Were you with Karen?" I asked him. Johan, clearly in a bad mood, snapped back at me, "I got called into HR because of you. The decision on my punishment will come later. What are you going to do about this?" The way Johan turned the blame on me, making me out to be the villain despite his actions, almost made me laugh. Crying over such a man was a waste of time. There's nothing to be done. "Do as you please," I said calmly. "You understand the situation, right? If we divorce, I'm taking the kids." "Still want to divorce?" His attempt to use our sons as leverage was pathetic, and I told him so. "What are you talking about? You think you'll get custody after likely losing your job? Divorce is a foregone conclusion. Stop being ridiculous." Johan had nothing to say, of course. Getting caught in adultery during work hours meant dismissal seemed inevitable. Was he still so clueless about the gravity of his actions? If that's the case, then he's incredibly foolish. "I'll be leaving tomorrow." "Wait a minute. Can't we consider starting over? Can't you forgive just one affair?" Johan, now taking a submissive stance, began apologizing to the assertive me. "One time," I asked. According to Anders, Karen's behavior had been odd for several months. Given Anders's job involved mostly being out for sales, there was a good chance she might have been returning home like this more than once. "Just one." Johan responded weakly, his eyes darting around from the lack of confidence in his answer. It was clear it wasn't just once. It felt ridiculous to pursue it any further, so I dropped the subject. The next day, I told my sons about Johan's infidelity. They are in 6th grade now, old enough to understand that hurting and betraying others is wrong. I apologized for having such a conversation at this sensitive time in their lives, and they said they wanted to talk it over alone and went to their room. After just a few minutes, they came out with their bags packed and said, "We're on your side, Mom." I couldn't help but cry. The boys laughed and comforted me as I apologized again. Then we went back to my parents' house. My parents were speechless when they heard about Karen and Johan's actions. Despite being happy that we had become close as sisters again, I felt sorry, but Mom apologized to me, crying, "Karen hasn't changed after all. I'm sorry for always making you endure her." Cut ties with both Karen and Johan. "We will keep our distance from Karen to the bare minimum," Dad said, and I felt relieved. From that day, I started commuting to work from my parents' home. Johan, perhaps on suspension, didn't come to the office, but called me multiple times instead. Ignoring him as I didn't have time to deal with it, he began to send messages day and night. "I love you, Hannah. Let's live happily as a family of 4 again." I was insane. I was just deceived by that woman. "I don't know how to live without you, Hannah." Perhaps these were what you'd call Romeo emails. I was almost fooled for a moment, but thanks to my sons laughing uproariously at those messages, I realized how ridiculous they were. However, I couldn't ignore him forever. Eventually, I had to meet him to sign the divorce papers. I made plans to meet Johan at a cafe on my day off, choosing to meet at a cafe instead of going home, following Anders's advice. He said that being in a public place would help keep the conversation calm. When Anders and Karen arrived at the cafe together, Karen had become so thin in just a few days that she looked like a different person. She must have fallen out of favor with Anders. Serves her right. "Now, both Karen and Johan, please sign the divorce papers." It seemed Karen was also reluctant to divorce, and the two hesitated to sign. Johan said, "It's a misunderstanding, Anders. It's your choice to divorce, but we won't." "Are you still saying that?" "My sons and I no longer consider you family," I retorted, addressing Johan's desperate attempts. Anders sighed deeply and said, "You could go to court, but it's clear you'll lose. Considering the alimony and legal fees for the divorce trial, can you afford it?" "Alimony for the divorce trial?" Johan repeated, looking confused. "Of course," Anders replied. "You both betrayed your families, Karen to me and Hannah, Johan. You'll have to pay us a proper settlement in the divorce trial." Johan and Karen's faces fell as the gravity of the situation finally sunk in. They knew they had no choice but to sign the papers, bringing their betrayal and their marriages to an end. Karen started trembling silently, her silence and weight loss now making sense. "What am I supposed to do? I might be fired. How can I pay?" Johan began to argue, pale-faced. "You did this to yourself. Besides, you owe child support for both kids, right, Karen?" At my words, Karen flinched. "You wanted to live together, right? You're welcome to have the house." I laughed loudly. "And don't forget the mortgage payments." Johan was taken aback, probably having forgotten about the mortgage. Both sat sweating, pale and silent in front of the divorce papers. Later, Anders introduced me to a lawyer, and I managed to claim alimony and legal fees, finalizing the divorce. Johan, who had resisted the divorce so much, proposed to Karen immediately after our divorce was finalized. I knew he had liked Karen from the start, but when did their affair turn serious? Hearing this, I felt nothing but disdain. Meanwhile, Karen, who had genuinely loved Anders, was abandoned and eventually lost her job too. Why did she end up with Johan despite loving Anders so much? Remaining puzzled, I asked Anders about it. He hesitated before revealing, "Actually, she started complaining about you a few months ago." "Really? Complaining about what?" "About how you, who are useless, got married and even have kids. She said it was extravagant," he explained. Could it really be because of that, I wondered? But considering Karen's personality, it wasn't impossible. Yet the thought that she went to such lengths just to set me up was horrifying. "It was because I thought you might be in danger that I consulted you, Lenny, but I never imagined it would lead to this with Johan." "I'm truly sorry," Anders said apologetically. "It's okay. It's over now, and Johan is to blame for taking up Karen's invitation as well." That concluded our conversation. Anders and I agreed to keep in touch for updates on the divorce compensation and legal consultations. According to him, the two, burdened with a substantial amount of divorce compensation, ended up marrying and living together. Karen was abandoned by her parents and had nowhere else to go. It seemed she reluctantly accepted Johan's proposal because she had no family left. From what the lawyer told me, Karen couldn't accept that she ended up divorcing Anders and marrying Johan, whom she didn't love, because of me. The lawyer mentioned getting hurled with abusive language every time he called her. While I felt sorry for the lawyer, he continued to support me firmly, perhaps because of Anders's presence, and I couldn't be more grateful. For a while, we still had to make calls to demand the divorce compensation, and it seems I'll continue to rely on their support. 5 years passed. The divorce compensation and child support were being paid on time, and my emotional wounds had largely healed. One day, after a long period of calm, the lawyer contacted me. "Karen says she has something to talk to you about." I refused, knowing her. It would likely end up with her using me as a verbal punching bag for stress relief. I decided never to trust or forgive Karen again and asked the lawyer to convey my refusal. However, Karen insisted it was urgent, and Johan also requested a meeting on her behalf. Given their persistence, I reluctantly agreed. Lacking the courage to meet them alone, I contacted Anders, feeling somewhat guilty for doing so after such a long time. He gladly agreed to accompany me. And so, I met with them after a long while. Johan and Karen were sitting at the cafe with a solemn demeanor. When Karen saw my face, she looked slightly relieved. "What's this about? Why did you call me here?" I asked. Karen said, "Actually, I've developed renal failure and need to undergo dialysis." I was taken aback. "It's your fault." "No, both of your faults, that Karen ended up like this. She couldn't sleep without drinking alcohol, and yet, because of the divorce settlement payments, she had to work. Your actions have destroyed her health." Johan angrily blamed us. But I thought it was their own doing. Anders seemed to agree as he sighed and looked exasperated. "So what? I'm not reducing or refunding the divorce settlement. Be thankful I agreed to installments." I stood firm. Karen, crying, lowered her head. "I'll pay the divorce settlement. Please, I'm begging you. Give me a kidney." "What?" I exclaimed loudly at her outrageous request. "What are you talking about? There's no way I'd give it to you." When I refused, Johan said, "You were born with a twin, with Karen. For this reason, you have a duty to help her." "What are you talking about? Who's been pushing all the unpleasant things onto me? Did Karen ever help me once in such situations?" "Don't talk about trivial matters. Karen's life is at stake here," Johan angrily retorted. Karen began to cry and plead, apologizing. Johan insulted me as heartless, pressuring me for the transplant as if threatening. At that moment, feeling as though I was being blamed, Anders spoke up. "If she needs dialysis, then undergo dialysis. Do you understand how tough dialysis is? And do you understand how difficult a transplant is? Why should she risk her life for Karen?" Their words left them speechless. I felt relieved with Anders's support and caught my breath. "Moreover, Karen, you've repeatedly called Hannah useless. Isn't it too convenient to ask for help only when you're in trouble? But that's Karen. You've destroyed Hannah's happy life. Hannah has no obligation to save your life." Karen broke down crying, and Johan was at a loss for words. Both of them must have thought that I would surely give them a kidney. If I had been alone, I might have been persuaded. Once again, Anders saved me. "Take care then. Oh, and don't forget the transfer for this month's payment." With that, I got up and left. Whether I'm called heartless or a devil, I cannot forgive them both. I don't know what kind of life they will lead from now on, but I hope they never forget what they did and reflect on it. It seems Johan and Karen were both working part-time to make ends meet, but now that Karen can no longer work properly, their financial situation is dire. But that's their karma. Everything is the result of their actions. Their atonement won't end until they've paid the compensation ordered in the divorce settlement. I continue to live happily with my parents and sons. My parents no longer even mention Karen's name, but it seems they are happy to see the twins getting along well. It's comforting to see a bond between my sons that Karen and I never had. I continue to keep in touch with Anders frequently. He's a genuinely good person, always thoughtful and considerate. It appears he has developed feelings for me, but I'm not ready to reciprocate them at this time. I don't want to cause any more upset for my sons, but in a few years, when they come of age, I hope to have the chance to think about my own happiness again.